Hello, friends, and welcome to the next week of our Bhagavatam study. All right, so we're back on the description of avatars. Has just really come to an end. It's just going to wrap up with a couple of statements. If you remember, Brahma said that there's basically two types of avatars: avatars which deal with our world versus the avatars which reveal their own world to us. And he said that the avatars which reveal their own world to us are more important because that's the main purpose or benefit of the avatar is to show us, give us an experience of something that's a bit outside of our zone of experience. And so he's going to kind of clarify that right now at the end. So if you remember, we ended up on Friday talking about how nature has these three basic qualities to it, and there are different divinities or avatars that are in charge of using and expressing those three qualities. And there was Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and they were overseen by Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva, and they had some different divine powers and different divine beings through whom they're expressed. So now we're just going to wrap up that with Brahma saying that the guna avatars are not on the same level as the lila avatars. So the guna avatars are the ones that deal with our world and are in charge of these three qualities of nature. And lila avatars are the ones that show you their world. Although they do represent a portion of the all-powerful, still their greatness is confined within this illusory realm. So Brahma continues to explain that Vishnu is far greater than the limits of this illusory realm. Even though he's taking the responsibility to superintend the sattva guna of this realm. The sattva guna of this realm actually is the essence of reality anyway. Like, think about what sattva is. Sattva means trueness or substance. And the function of sattva guna is to give you something to perceive, to allow you to perceive. It's perception. So the sattva guna really is essentially consciousness itself. Rajaguna and Tamaguna are the adjuncts to consciousness when it's dissatisfied. When it's dissatisfied, then it gets sadness and hunger. It's sad about what it's dissatisfied with and hungry for something new. So that gives you tamas, or the sadness for the past, and then rajas, which is the hunger or the aspiration for the future. But the actual reality itself is sattva. So in this world, you got a blend of these three qualities. But the central one is the sattva, which is actually the true reality. It's not that this world is a fabrication of ex nihilo. It's just a fabrication of nothing. It's something. It's just a misperception of something. The world is not. When we say the world is illusory, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means that it's not what we think it is. So there is realness in the world, and that realness is Vishnu. So Brahma is saying Vishnu, who's taking care of the sattva guna, which is providing the realness of the substance to the world, he's not just in this world. That realness extends beyond this world as well. So he says Vishnu is far greater than the limits of this illusory realm. Even a scientist who could count all the particles of dust on Earth would not be able to count all the glories of Vishnu. His swift and firm steps surpassed the roof of the universe and agitated the unagitated energetic equilibrium. Not even I can find the limit of the mystically powerful personality. Nor can the sages born before you, what to speak of those who are junior to us. The origin of divinity in this world, Sesha, sings of the qualities of the all-attractive with 1,000 mouths, and even to this day has not found their limit. Okay, so that's the end of the description of the avatars, and we're going to start a new subject. It's kind of segueing into this new subject. So some of the points that he raises there in finishing up the list of the avatars is these avatars that are in charge of mundane things are still avatars. They're still divine, and their divinity is beyond the thing that they're just in charge of. That's important for understanding Shiva and even for understanding yourself. And he says the other point that he has closed up with is, I'm just pointing you in the direction and giving you some information about Vishnu and the avatars, but these things are inexhaustible and infinite, so it's not like it's a complete dissertation. All right, now let's look at this new section. The new section is quite interesting. So since he's saying Vishnu and or divinity or Bhagavan is infinite, that's what he's saying, right? Even though Vishnu is superintending something finite, he's actually infinite. Even though I've given you a list of these avatars, they're infinite. Even though the avatar seems to come in one period of history and leave in another period of history, they're infinitely existing. They always exist. So Narada's going to have this doubt in his mind, like, if this subject is infinite, then how is it going to be comprehended at all? So the next section that we're going to deal with is how the consciousness of an individual like you or I, which don't ever come to the mistake that your consciousness is finite. Your consciousness is divine, so it's also infinite. But don't also come to the mistake that there's different types of infinitude, and one of them is called infinitesimal. We have an English word for it, and the other one is infinite. Infinite is just a generic term for anything which is unmeasurable. Infinitesimal means unmeasurably small. So it's a useful word for distinguishing the infinitude of Atma versus the infinitude of Paramatma. The infinitude of the individual versus the infinitude of the Supreme. They're both infinite, of course, Purnamada Purnamidam. But the one, Chaitanas Chaitananam Eko Bahasya Vidadhati Kaman, the one infinite is the foundation for the infinitude of the others. So there's not exactly the same type of infinity. So you can describe one as a subordinate or a dependent infinitude, that's you and me, and the other is a swarat, a sovereign, a self-manifest infinitude that's not dependent. So the question that the topic is going to be, how does the infinitesimal consciousness of you or I grasp or comprehend or perceive or interact with the infinite being? Right? That's the question that's going to be addressed now in this section of Bhagavatam. And there's an also actually the way I've written out in the book is not only how does the infinitesimal perceive the infinite, but also if the infinite is infinite, then how does it become finite? And do you know what finite means? Fin. In the Latin, we're using an English word. It's based on Latin. It's based on this Latin word fin, which means end. So, but when you also have this word fine, like refine and fine, high quality, something that's very carefully defined is called refined or fine. So something which has clear boundaries is refined and fine. The fin means the end. So if you say something is finite, it means it has an end. And if something's infinite, it means it doesn't have an end. So, for example, I am 5'5", I think, inches. So that's the end. Top of my head ends. So at 6 feet, you're not going to see any part of me. It's finite, right? So Krishna, for example, also has a height. So if that's the case, then how can anybody say that he's infinite? He's got a height. He's got a size. He's got a weight. Now, you already heard about this interesting descriptions in Bhagavatam where he has a belt around his waist, but his mother can't fit a rope around his waist, no matter how much rope she uses. So there's something there that's very important for you to understand. I don't know if it's going to come up in this text itself, but I'm kind of riffing on this right now. It's like you got to understand how infinitude includes finitude. Finitude doesn't exclude infinitude. So, for example, you got the numbers. Let's just to explain it in a real simple, concrete way so you can actually grasp it. You have like number set. If you take a number set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it's a finite number set, right? But you actually have an infinite number of innumerable points in that finite set. Even if you just take a set of 1 and 2, a very small finite set of numbers, 1 and 2, you still have an infinite numerically addressable points between 1 and 2. Like you can do 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, and then you get to 2. Well, that's still finite, but between 1 and 1.1, there's still an infinite number of addressable numeric points, right? 1.11, 1.12, 1.13, 1.14, 1.15. Is that right? So you can actually fit 100 points in between 1 and 2. Or you could fit 1,000, you can fit 10,000, you can fit an infinite. So that's what I mean, that finitude doesn't destroy infinitude. Finitude allows infinitude to take a shape. This is such a simple point, really. It sounds like, whoa, this guy's blowing my mind. Just because I'm using these fancy words that you don't use that often, like infinitude and finitude. But it's a really simple point that you can just see by counting. And if you apply this point to theology or to philosophy, you can see that you don't have to obliterate the concept of beauty and color and form and shape in the infinite Godhead in order to maintain the concept that it's infinite. That's a very, very prehistoric kindergarten approach to understanding divinity, is to say, well, it's infinite, so it can't have a form. It's super mind-blowingly dumb. The actual semi-intelligent approach to this is, of course, it's got to, if finitude doesn't destroy infinitude, it expresses infinitude. So you got Narada's question is also like, how does he, if he's infinite, then how does he become an avatar? And this is because the avatar is finite. It gets located in a particular period in history, in a particular space on Earth or in the universe. So that's what, now Brahma's going to explain that answer basically. Let's get into the wording of how Brahma talks about it. He says, the mercy of the all-attractive is also infinite. He bestows it to those who, without pretense, fully give their entire being to him. As a result, these fortunate souls cross beyond the insurmountable divine mysteries. So you see what he's saying there. Now he's actually addressing how can a infinitesimal consciousness perceive or grasp the infinite being. And Brahma's answer is because the infinite being has something that he's calling mercy, translated as mercy. What it means is there's some kind of kindness or love involved, that the supreme being wants to be experienced. Just like you don't want to be lonely. That's why like coronavirus lockdown makes people go crazy after a while, because you get too lonely by being too isolated from other people. Nobody's seeing you, nobody's interacting with you, nobody's touching you. It drives you nuts. Nobody likes to be lonely. It's the fundamental problem that everybody has, the feeling of loneliness. So the Supreme is also not going to want to be alone. And the way that you not be alone is by having somebody experience you and by having somebody to experience. So the Supreme is going to make effort to be experienceable because he wants to be experienced. So that's what Brahma is saying, is there's this dynamic involved where there's this thing about love and desire that's intrinsic in consciousness. And because of that, the infinite is going to enable the infinitesimal to grasp the infinite. So how is that possible? Because the love or the mercy or that power that the infinite has is also infinite. It can't be limited. So you can't be prevented from doing anything. As a result, these fortunate souls cross beyond the insurmountable divine mysteries. Otherwise, there's a divine mystery. Mysteriousness is insurmountable. The infinitesimal can't grasp the infinite. Others, so he gives that, he wants to be experienced, but he doesn't want to be experienced by people that would misunderstand. Just like I gave up my Facebook account because I'm sick and tired of being experienced by people who don't experience me the right way. Or, you're not going to want to go out and make friends with people that don't understand you, right? You want to make friends with people that understand you. This is the same dynamic is in God, is in the Supreme Being. Supreme is not revealing himself to people that would not be capable of interacting with him in the way that he wants to be interacted with. So he's giving it to those who have no pretense and who are loving towards him. But the others, the people whose thoughts of I and mind, now he says this, others whose thoughts of I and mind remain limited to a corpse that will be eaten by dogs and jackals can never comprehend the unlimited avatar. So he's saying the problem is some people are selfish. They don't perceive Bhagavan because they're selfish. They're not interested in perceiving Bhagavan. And he can't even give them the ability to perceive him. And be careful about how you understand this, because he says this thing, I and mine, everybody's going to jump up and say, yay, I and mine. I know that phrase. Then it means that ego is bad. But carefully read what Brahma actually said. He didn't say that I and mine is bad. He said that to have an I and mine, which is limited to a corpse that will be eaten by dogs and jackals. In other words, people who have a fallacious, fractured from the Supreme, fractured from the whole non-holistic sense of I and mine, those people can't grasp the Supreme because they're not interested in receiving the love energy from the Supreme that enables it. Yes, you got it, Melissa. So that's right. Now, Narada asks, can you give examples of people who have received this mercy and can thus comprehend the attractive avatars to a significant extent? So Brahma says, he's going to give a list of people. So you hear some interesting names now. My dear son, here are the foremost of those who have affirmed this mysterious mystery, who have attained this mysterious mercy of the Supreme. I probably should use my glasses. So why do you want a list of people that have understood the avatar? Because you can refer to their statements about the avatars. Like if I really understand how to solve Rubik's Cube versus, like, for example, let's make this real. My son really knows how to solve the Rubik's Cube. I have no clue. So if you want to learn how to solve a Rubik's Cube and you waste your time asking me how to do it, that's a waste of time. So if you really want to understand the avatar, it's very useful if you know the people who have understood the avatar. So you can learn from their statements about the avatars. That's why this is being said now. So he says, my dear son, here are the foremost of those who attained this mysterious mercy of the Supreme. Myself, yourself, blessed Shiva, Prahlad, the best of demons, Swayambhuva Manu and his wife and their children, Prachinibhari, Ribhu, and even Anga, Dhruva, Ikshaku, Aila, Muchkunda, Deha, Gadhi, Raghu, Ambrisha, Shatadhanu, Anu, Rantidevi, Bhishma of godly oath, Bali, Amuttarayana, Dileep. We have an astrologer named Dileep. in our friends list. So Bhari Tanku Shibi Devala Palada Saraswata Uddhava Prashara Bhurisena Bhurishena and others like Vibhishana, Hanuman, Shuka, Arjun, Aristisena, Vidura, and Shrutdev. So he gave a list of them. Some of those names you might know. So those people are famous because the things that they say are very important. They get recorded in the ancillary Vedic texts because these were people who have understood. My sound is low. Let me check that. Test. All right, hang on a second. This should be better. All right. My dear, all right, so these are very unusual persons, Narada asks. Is it possible for more common people? No, that's actually a weird question because maybe these guys are only unusual because they, like, everybody is born the same way, right? So, you know what I'm saying? Like maybe these guys were normal and now they're not normal because they did this. So it doesn't mean that normal people can't do it. But anyway, Narada has this question. These are very unusual persons. Is it possible for more common people to comprehend the infinite, all attractive? Brahma's answer, yes. Common people like housewives and laborers and even animals and uncivilized humans can also receive the infinite mercy of the all attractive and can thus surmount the insurmountable divine mysteries. So you don't have to be dedicated to philosophy and be a scholar. That's basically what he's saying. And you don't have to be a superhuman. You could be a regular person, man or woman, doing regular jobs. Now Narada is kind of amazed and inspired by this, so he asks, how? How is this possible? And Brahma says, although they don't have a pure background, they can attain this incomparable status if they learn how to cultivate devotion to the amazing actor. So it's possible for everybody to get feelings, right? And it's basically the correct feeling towards the Supreme, which enables one to receive the energy from the Supreme that allows you to comprehend the Supreme. So since anybody can develop feelings, even people that have no particular qualification, even animals, could come to understand the Supreme. Now, Narada says, but how would they do that? How would they get devotion to the Supreme or feelings for the Supreme? It seems unusual that an ordinary person would do that. And Brahma's reply is because they deeply heard about him somehow. So that's lucky. When they surmount the insurmountable mysteries, Narada asked, what do they realize? This is a great question. So now he's saying, okay, I understand that. I understand that point. Now anybody can understand God. And like, you know, that movie Ratatouille where there's the chef says anybody can cook. So what the Bhagavatam is basically saying is anybody can experience the Supreme. You don't have to be not in Kali Yuga. You don't have to be not a human. You don't have to be a sannyasi or a tyagi or a saint or a sadhu. Anybody can do it. If you hear about the Supreme from the Bhagavatam, nicely so that you develop feelings, true feelings. So Narada accepts that and he says, okay, so when these people get saturated by the divine energy so that they can experience the divine, what exactly do they experience? And Brahma's answer is it's different for different people. Some realize the Paramatma, which is the super soul, who is eternally extremely placid, fearless, and the substance of all cognizance. He's uncontaminated by and absolutely equal towards all causes and effects. He says some people, he says different people will comprehend the infinite. When the infinitesimal is finally able to comprehend the infinite, it will still comprehend it from its own infinitesimal vantage point. So some of the people who comprehend the Supreme as something categorically referred to as Paramatma, which is a super neutral, peaceful being who is the origin for all consciousness and life, but isn't directly involved in the affairs that are taking place in the world. And then Narada says, okay, some will experience Paramatma, what others experience. And Brahma said, others might realize Brahman. Some might realize Paramatma, others might realize Brahman. Narada says, can you describe Brahman? You describe Paramatma. Can you describe Brahman? So Brahma says, well, no, I can't actually, because it's indescribable. So he says, I can't exactly describe Brahman. They experience it as a type of happiness that arises from the lack of all grief. This is a fantastic description. Such a succinct, perfect description of Brahman and what the experience of Brahman actually is. It's a type of happiness, but it's not a active or positive happiness. It's a type of happiness that arises from having no problems at all. So it's a kind of neutral, natural, effortless happiness that just arises when all causes of grief are absent. They experience it as a type of happiness arising from the lack of all grief. Brahman is beyond words because words always have dualities and objectives. So you can't really use words any further than that to explain anything about Brahman, because Brahman has no subject-object. This is why it has no positive happiness. There's no interactions or relationships or individuality whatsoever when in the experience of the Supreme as Brahman. It's just a feeling of existence and eternality. And there's no worry whatsoever, and therefore that arises a type of kind of lazy happiness. So he's saying you get some people will realize the Supreme as Paramatma, which is a peaceful, placid being. That's the origin of all consciousness. Some people will realize the Supreme as Brahman, which is just this effortless existence itself. And then Narada says, are there some others? Do other people realize something besides Paramatma or Brahman? And Brahma replies to Narada, some others may realize Bhagavan, the all-attractive Supreme Person, of whom Paramatma and Brahman are parts, and in front of whom illusion flees bashfully. So these are the three, the classic three. There's Brahman, which is existence itself. Paramatma is the person who is emanating that existence, because remember, existence means consciousness. Consciousness, reality or existence means the thing which can be experienced. So the foundation for reality is consciousness. So this is why the basis of Brahman is that Atma, or a person, because persons are defined as emanators of consciousness. And then, so there's just the consciousness itself, you might realize, that's Brahman, or you might realize a person emanating the consciousness, but not really doing anything other than emanating the consciousness. And then you might realize fully the Bhagavan, which is the person emanating the consciousness for a purpose, which is to enjoy positive, exciting happiness. And then Narada says, is there anything else? Is there something that might be realized about the Supreme that doesn't fall in these three categories of Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan? And Brahma replies, no. That's it. There's nothing further than that. These are the three types, categories. And he says, those who realize the infinite as all-attractive Brahman become self-illuminating. Interesting term. They have no further need for meditations, restrictions, regulations, rituals, and so on, just as the rain god has no need to dig a well. That's a great saying. Huh? The rain god has no need for a well. In the same way, anybody who has realized Bhagavan has no need for any type of process to get anything, because they have no need for anything else. So they have no need for any ceremony, ritual, effort, work, anything. Bhagavan is all-encompassing and all-attractive, Brahma continued. He is everything desirable. So what do you need something else? You won't need something else. From him flows the complete perfection of every endeavor that our acquired or inherent natures may aspire for. Even when everything is destroyed, even when the body collapses and crumbles into its elements, still the eternal accomplishment of realizing Bhagavan is never vanquished. Just like the sky remains intact no matter how bad the storm. Dear boy, Brahma continued, the all-attractive Bhagavan is the one I have spoken about as the manifester of everything. Without him, no other cause or effect can exist. Now, how much more is left? Okay, we got like 3 paragraphs left in chapter 7. So let's wrap up chapter 7 today. So, not just to get too far in over our heads, what he said was he finished up the list of the avatars, and he's finished it up by saying these beings are infinite. Then Narada says, well, if they're infinite, how do they take finite form, which can be comprehended by an infinitesimal consciousness? And Brahma said, that's the mercy. That's the fact that Bhagavan wants to be experienced, so he extends the capacity to experience himself to the infinitesimal. Those who receive it can then experience him. Those who are not interested in receiving it don't. And then Narada asks, those who receive this potency from the infinite to perceive the infinite, what do they perceive? Brahma says they perceive basically in 3 categories of perception. One is they just perceive the essence of existence. The other is they perceive a person, a being but is not really an interactive or an active being. And the third is an interactive, active being who's the origin of the essence of existence. And then he finishes up by saying the people that can understand Bhagavan they fully understand everything about the Supreme. And therefore they fully understand everything about everything, and they don't have any further need for anything whatsoever. So now to finish up this chapter, Brahma looks at his son Narada very affectionately and says, the all-attractive himself enlightened me on these topics. So I know it's pretty amazing that I can tell you about this stuff, but that's because Bhagavan himself gave me this information. The all-attractive himself enlightened me on all these topics, and I have explained them to you as the beautiful tales of the all-attractive. So this is basically he's saying, I told you the Bhagavatam. This is the essence of the Bhagavatam. Now you please elaborate on this compilation of his glories. Elaborate on these avatars that I explained to you briefly, and the substance, the philosophical substance that I just explained to. That is the Bhagavatam. Expand it so that devotion for all attractive Hari, the soul of all and the repose of all, can flourish among many. So if you go back to early when we started doing this stream, if you remember where the Bhagavatam was explaining its own history, it was Narada Muni who taught Vyas what he should write. Vyas wrote the Bhagavatam, but it was Narada Muni who told him what to write. He gave him the seed of what the Bhagavatam should be. And now you can see that Narada Muni got the basic seed from Brahma, and Brahma got it from Vishnu. Narada was honored and inspired. Should I elaborate on those portions that have to do with the material world, he asked? Or should I only focus on the all-attractive in his own spiritual context? Remember, there's 2 types of avatars. So he's saying, you told me to expand on this, but you told me that the avatars that reveal their own world are more important than the ones that only interact with our world. So should I elaborate on the ones that are only dealing with this world? And Brahma's answer is, you should elaborate on both, including how to appreciate the material world as an emanation from the Supreme Master. Because that is the important, remember, that is where you start. You start to understand Bhagavan by panentheistic realization of what the world is, where you see that the world is actually manifesting God. The world means you and everybody in it, and all the trees and all the squirrels and all the birds and all the termites and mosquitoes. Those who regularly and attentively hear such things are never bewildered by materialism. So that's also an important thing. If you don't understand the divinity of the external world, then you'll be bewildered by an illusion about the external world that it's yours. And that means you'll be bewildered by the very substance of the thing that pulls your attention away from receiving the merciful power of the Supreme, to be able to interact with and understand the Supreme. Bardo asks, what defines one's affinity or merit, as the Buddhists call it, to a particular type of realization? I don't think it's ascribable to anything other than the swabhav of the jiva. If you go back to that thing we covered a couple of weeks ago about swabhava, jiva, karma, kala, and dravya, the 5 fundamental elements of reality. Every mode of consciousness has a particular angle by which it views the rest of the consciousness. And that particular angle just gives it its inherent nature. So it's just how looking at a mountain from different sides reveals different facets of the mountain. The mountain looks different when you look at it from different sides. So it's just the individuality of different atmas situated all around the central atma, paramatma, is that they'll see different sides or angles to it. So I think it's defined by the inherent Bhav, the basic fundamental being, the basic fundamental nature. Any other question? Next time we're going to start. Oh, we're almost done then. This has 10 chapters, part 2. And next time we're going to start chapter 8. And in chapter 8, this tale of Brahma is closed. And so we're going to go back to Parikshit and Shukadev, the king, and Shuka, the young sage. And Parikshit's going to ask him some more questions. Bardo wants to know how the Supreme can experience loneliness. The Supreme doesn't experience loneliness. It doesn't experience loneliness in the way that we experience it as an actual overriding, debilitating experience. Because the Supreme, in order to not experience loneliness, the Supreme exists in such a way that it allows itself to be comprehended and understood. But there's some loneliness in the spicing of how it interacts with other things. So it's a little different than here, where we have loneliness as something which we become crushed by. In the Bhagavan's experience, loneliness exists, but not as something that's above his head, but something that's under his grasp. So he's using it to spice his experience of how much he enjoys interacting with people. All right, guys. And by the way, so that type of loneliness is called Vipralamba. And it's just like it's different than actually being lonely, but it's a sense of the spice in the wanting to be with somebody. Okay, so I'll sign off for today. See you tomorrow.